Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back again to Procrastination Pit Stop. We have another amazing guest for you today. We have with us Kori Tomelden. Kori is a certified coach, advocate, and founder of Empowered Neuromom. She draws from her own journey as a neurodivergent mom raising neurodivergent daughters to provide practical tools, relatable stories, and emotional support that help fellow moms thrive. With humor, pop culture references, and a deep commitment to neurodiversity, she empowers them to redefine motherhood, tackle sensory overload, and embrace authenticity on their own terms. Kori, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you so much for being here as well. We have a lot to go over, a lot to discuss because I know that the moms are often overlooked, but we are going to change that on this show today. Before we dig into it, though, we do like to have an icebreaker on this show, and the question for you today was, which cartoon character do you resonate with the most, and why?
I probably have two. One, when they're both Disney, so one would be Stitch from the Lilo and Stitch franchise, just because he's this ball of chaotic energy, but when harnessed the right way, he's very productive and powerful. And he embraces himself for who he is, his whole cute but fluffy thing. And the second is another Disney character, and that would be Mulan. And this one resonates with me a lot because of her song. Her big song is called Reflection, and it's who she's supposed to be versus, what society expects of her, what her parents expect of her versus who she really is. And, acknowledging to herself that she can't keep hiding who she really is. Yeah. So those two are probably the ones that I resonate with the most. I have a lot.
I like that, Stitch and Mulan. I like those very contrasting characters, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. It's like it's personality wise, and then I think almost like just mantra wise, and you know, stuff
I
like that.
understand
So,
that. No, it's I like it. I like that there's two and they're so different. I really like that. Especially given that we are all different and sometimes we try to peg ourselves into a single hole and it just doesn't really work much. Kind of like that juice box in the back of the car. Doesn't
yeah.
go. Okay. So before we get too much further into it as well, Kori, how would you define procrastination and what does it mean to you personally?
Growing up, it was more, I guess, what you would consider a traditional sense procrastination in that, you're just putting things off until the last minute or for whatever reason or another, like for me as a child and then as a teenager, it was always, well, I know I have this deadline, but my deadline isn't until then. So I don't have to do it until the day before then because it's still going to get done. When in reality, I could have just, gotten it done, gotten out of the way, which was what my mom always told me was just do it now and get it over with. I didn't want to, so I didn't. And I still skated by with really good grades. So for me, that was just reinforcing the whole, well, I don't have to do it now. I can just do it when I get to it and it'll be fine. But then as I got older and as I was looking into more things to help my older daughter, she's non-speaking autistic, was looking into executive functions and how they really affect and impact people with neurodivergence. As I was reading more and more about it, I was like, oh, okay, well, this maybe explains why I do certain things and why I keep putting them off. Because one of the biggest things for executive functioning is it's time management, which I actually hate the term time management. That's different, but it's that time thing. And procrastination is impacted by executive functioning and prioritization. It's impacted by executive functioning. With ADHD too, there's the whole time blindness thing and hyperfocusing, which both tied together very closely for me. So it was one of those big things, like really learning more about the executive functioning stuff. It helped me really understand why I was procrastinating, why I was doing these things. And then from there to just kind of develop strategies that weren't mainstream, or maybe they were mainstream, but to adapt them to fit my brain instead of trying to make my brain fit the strategies because they weren't working. And sometimes they were just adding a lot of unnecessary stress. So then I would just put it off even more. Like, no, I really don't want to do this because it makes me feel uncomfortable.
Thank you for sharing that, and I definitely want to dig into those tips and strategies that you have for sure. Before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and sort of how you got to be where you are today?
Sure. As I said, my older daughter is non-speaking autistic, and she was diagnosed in 2003, I believe. So it was shortly before her, no, 2004, shortly before her third birthday. And back in the day, before we really had things like Google and Facebook groups and all of that, the amount of resources available was just very limited, and especially for girls on the autism spectrum, because a lot of the research then, and still a little bit today, was very skewed towards boys. And even then, it was, when there was research for girls, it was for the more what they would term higher functioning, or Asperger's back then. And that was not my daughter. My daughter was non-speaking, and she's what would be considered autism level 3 now. Back then, it was classic autism. So tackling all of that without the community, without the support, without the resources, at that point, I felt like I had one of two choices. I could either just sink and, just wallow in this, well, what am I going to do now? Or learn, put myself into a position where I could better support her and better support myself to really adapt the environment around her. And it just got me really into this driven mode of, okay, well, this is what I can do. This is how I can help her. This is how I can help myself. So I've had that mindset since her diagnosis. And then, as I mentioned, as I was researching how to better support her as she was getting older, when she was getting into her teens, it's like, okay, well, how does this affect her now? Because it's clearly changing, hormones and all that. And as I was reading more about it, I started noticing more patterns and more things that were more present in my life, and also to some degree in hers. And like the structure and stuff like that I had set up for her had also very inadvertently, but very beneficially, helped me, because I was creating that predictability for her with routines at home, and it was creating predictability for me. And it's like, I started just piecing things together. So that led me into the whole, I call it my self-diagnosis rabbit hole. So I started looking for all of the resources, the things. It's like, well, what does undiagnosed whatever look like? After a whole bunch of just like self-tests through Attitude magazine, I ended up with a self-diagnosis of inattentive ADHD. It's like, all right, I think I can grasp onto this. Helped explain a lot to me. And especially looking at like the undiagnosed ADHD in women, because that was it explained so much of my childhood, my teenage years. It really did explain a lot. So I went into a diagnosis, right? Scheduled a diagnosis appointment to explore medication options, just in case I needed them. I've been on medication in the past for other issues. And do I acknowledge that they work? Yes. Do I acknowledge that they don't work? Yes. It depends on the person. It depends on the combination of therapies. There's all different kinds of things that go into it. But I wanted to have that option. So I went into my appointment thinking and prepared that, okay, I'm going to get the ADHD inattentive. It's going to be fine. I walked out of my appointment virtually. This was right around COVID hitting, but I walked out of it with ADHD inattentive, and the diagnostic, my words are not coming. She also recommended and highly suggested autism level 1. I was like, what? Really? So that was another thing that I kind of added to my plate of things to look into. I fully embrace the ADHD diagnosis. I'm still, I guess you could say, coming to grips with, do I have autism, or is it just aspects of ADHD being exacerbated? But I can look at it and say, it's like, all right, well, some of these things do line up with an autism diagnosis. Okay, fine. I'll take it for what it is, but I lead with the ADHD diagnosis because that's really, I think, if I have to label myself and define myself in those terms, then that's where it comes in. Otherwise, I just say, yeah, neurodivergent. So that's pretty much how I got here. And with my daughter's autism being what it is, I'm also her full-time caregiver now. So having a flexible work schedule and being able to work from home, it was absolutely one of my biggest life non-negotiables. Even when she was still in school, it was having a schedule that worked around my family and not having to fit my family around a work schedule. So I held various part-time jobs until I finally, again, with COVID and all that, I have now a part-time job as a communication specialist. But my passion and really what I would like to be doing full-time is supporting other moms, whether they are also neurodivergent or just raising those neurodivergent girls. And not to dismiss the boys, I don't, I realize it doesn't discriminate. But there's still, I think, just such a gap in the disparity between gender support. So here I am.
Well, thank you much. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Kori, and also thank you for helping to break the stigma as well, because there is quite a stigma around those labels,
Yeah,
and it's not a bad thing, right? It's just a label. It's not it's not who we are or anything, right?
absolutely.
But I do think that sometimes what happens, and like even myself, like I've never been diagnosed, but I scored a 37, whatever, 37, whatever that means, right? And I think that a lot of people still hold that stigma, and I think they're maybe afraid of that label because, as you mentioned, I mean that I think we are on a better trajectory, but I mean, you're right. Even now, there's a big stigma around hiring. There's a big stigma around training. There's a big stigma around those labels and things too. Even though we know that somewhere, I mean, could be as high as 66% of all CEOs currently in the world are ADHD, and that's kind of what makes them good at their position, right?
I was just going to say was that for I forget what the exact statistics are, but the research is showing, people who have ADHD, they make for awesome entrepreneurs and awesome CEOs because they're great at coming up with the ideas. It's the actual execution that sometimes we fall a little bit short. Yeah.
And you mentioned some strategies. I'm interested in digging into some of those strategies.
Sure.
Because even as a procrastination coach, I always go with like what you said, right? You need to find something that works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And we have all these different systems, and sometimes we get frustrated because, that maybe these systems aren't really working, right? And the issue that I've found is that normally when, I very gently, go around this, but I'll say, okay, so this hasn't worked, this hasn't worked, this hasn't worked, this hasn't worked, we can try this. Have you considered that maybe you are, ADHD or maybe
Mm-hmm.
some other reason, and it's a delicate situation, right? Because I don't like giving out labels. I don't like suggesting labels either.
Mm-hmm.
I hate
Mm-hmm.
labels. I can go on the whole thing.
My theory and thought process around labels, just a tangent on that, is that unless it's something for sale and on a commodity, it does not need a label. I don't need a label.
On the other hand, it does help you sort of understand
Mm-hmm.
sort of those systems, though. So Paul just got on a tangent there. Please tell us some of the tips and tricks that have worked for you.
Sure. So again, it's going back to stuff that I was setting up for my daughter. She is very reliant on visual schedules. And for me, I've adapted that to combat the time blindness piece. Because for people with ADHD and who have executive function issues in general, this time blindness phenomenon, it's very real. Have always explained it as I just don't have the ability to see where my time is going. So for a digital clock, they're terrible for helping me keep time. Analog clocks are perfect because I can see, okay, this is what I have to work with. Here's this, here's that. So that was the first thing, was just learning and really understanding. It's like, all right, this is how I view time. And then hyperfocusing piece, which is also tied into the executive functioning. I have missed doing other things where I don't eat or don't go, don't drink my water or don't do other things because I'm just so into the zone on a task, which can be both really great because I can get super productive, but it can also be really just not great because sometimes I jeopardize my own health. I miss picking up my daughter from school. It's just those things that they add up. So I've learned, though, to do things like time blocking. That's been one of my biggest things, was figuring out, okay, it takes me this long to do this, it takes me this long to do that. Here's when I feel the most energized, right? Where I feel the most productive. Let me see what I can do in this time of the day and what time blocks I can fit in. And then, so that's one of the biggest things. It's the time blocking and the productivity pieces. It's prioritization. It's like, all right, I understand that I need to do this. I want to get this big thing done, but there's no way I'm going to be able to get the big thing done because the big thing is making me stressed. So it's breaking up bigger things into smaller, manageable tasks. And I know like some of it just sounds so simple, but until you have it explained to you or until you look into it, it's not simple. It's not intuitive, and at least for me. So time blocking, time chunking, and task chunking. So what I've done is I've taken those big things, broken them down into smaller things, and then broken down the smaller things into what are the exact steps that I need to take to get this done. And it also helps me not deviate from things, because otherwise it's like, oh crap, I missed a step. I can go back and look and say, oh, well, I didn't do this. Let me do this. And then everything just falls into place a little bit better. And the other reason I do these is because when I've used more traditional time management things like planners, I can't use a planner to save my life. I love stickers, so I got drawn into that. And I would say, it's like, oh, I have my planner. I'm going to be so productive this year. I'd get into it for about a month and then just ditch the whole thing because it was stressing me out. And I finally figured out why. With planners, they have their whole little hourly thing, 9 o'clock, whatever. And what stressed me out about it is that if I couldn't get something done within that specific time parameter, I'd start freaking out because there was my whole day just ruined. So that's where the time blocking adaptation came in. Was, okay, I have these blocks of time versus finite, I have to get it done right now or the world's going to end. And so there's things like that. And then I use timers. I use notifications. I live and die by my notifications on my Google Calendar to tell me, it's like, all right, I have to do this, this, this. And I know for some people it might seem invasive, it might seem annoying, but it works for me because it gives me that visual nudge. And one of the other biggest things that I've done is using music to help me with my time blocks and with my priorities and my tasks. So if I need something where I just want to get hyped up and I need to get in that good mood, I put on, pop or dance music or just something that's going to get me energized. When I'm doing more, I guess, mundane, repetitive tasks that I put off because they are mundane and they're boring, I put on opera and musicals because then my brain's focusing on, like, I'm listening to the libretto, I'm listening to the score, I'm breaking it down. It's like, oh, what instrument is that? Or what voice range? Or one of my favorites to listen to is Carmen, because it's in French. I took French in high school. Like, oh, I remember what this means. So while I'm focusing on that, I can just do the mundane, repetitive stuff without even realizing that I'm doing it. It's now that I say this out loud, I realize how odd that might seem, but it works for my brain. And I think that was really just the thing. It was like giving myself that permission to say, okay, well, this traditional mainstream stuff does not work for me. How can I make it work for me? Or just dismiss it entirely just because somebody else says, oh, this works great for me. Well, that's wonderful. I'm glad it's working for you. It did not work for me. And please don't start with well, did you try? Yes, I have tried it. I have tried all the things. I have exhausted all of the things to try with that planning system, and it just did not work. So,
And yes, thank you so much for sharing. Those are some very good tips, and they play into a lot of the things that we can do for sure. I do have a couple of follow-up questions for you on that as well. You mentioned the notifications and the Google notifications specifically. I can tell you right now, like, I have to mute my phone completely and set it on, like, do not disturb because There's Facebooks, there's
Mhm.
WhatsApps, there's Instagrams. Actually, I don't even use Facebook or Instagram, but I still get notifications on my phone from accounts I used to have. So do you turn all those off and just leave Google notifications, or do you set like different?
Well, what I do for that is I have do not disturb on, and then I have an app on there to, focus block, schedule block. I don't have my phone in front of me, so I don't know what the name of the app is, but I use an app to just block anything Google Play Store in particular, because if I go in there, then I go into games, and if I get into games, I'm going to waste my entire day playing that. No lie. And I will drain my bank account in the process. So I use an app for that. And then, yeah, I turn off notifications for things because on that do not disturb setting, it's only for people who are on my contact, that I can get the notifications. Actually, I keep my phone on silent. So when I don't have it right in front of me, I don't even know if it's going off. And I have removed, I don't use Facebook on my phone. I use it on my desktop only. I still have Messenger on there. I might have Instagram, but I don't really use my phone for all the apps and things like that, just because it's not productive for me. And I will doom scroll. Like, I will just get sucked into that. And then even on my regular Facebook on my desktop, I use Newsfeed Eradicator. So I can't just get stuck in the scroll. And if I want to go see somebody's updates, I have to actually go to their profile. And at that point, I'm like, no, I don't want to waste my time doing this. I talk to you in person. I'm like, stalking you on Facebook to see this stuff. But yeah, that's what I do. And then with Google, the way I have it set up is it notifies me not just through my phone, but also through the desktop. So that way, if I don't have my phone right with me, I can still get my notifications through the desktop. And I don't have the noises on because the noise it bothers me. But I need the visual. That's key, the visual.
Thank you for sharing that. The other question, I guess, comes down to you were mentioning about listening to music for mundane and boring tasks, and
Mhm.
that gets into a realm that's very interesting for me from this perspective of, the four levels of competency, right? You've got
Mhm.
unconsciously incompetent, consciously incompetent, consciously competent, and then unconsciously competent. And
Mhm.
when you talk about mundane and boring tasks, are you more in that? I'm guessing you're considering tasks that are more in that unconscious competency, or would they be also in the conscious competency?
I would say it's more of the unconscious competency. It's just because they're so repetitive, and it's just, so for example, my example for that would be content creation. It's like social media content creation, which I do for my job. So it's creating Facebook posts and scheduling those things. And it is, for me, it's repetitive. It's boring. I don't like it, but it has to get done. So it's just those, like, I guess, little things that aren't so much little things, but then, yeah, that's the best example I can think of, like, right now.
No, no, and I'm interested because a lot of the times, and I find myself doing this, and everybody finds themselves doing this many times a day. And the most common, I guess, sort of example is kind of when you're in the shower and your mind wanders, and then you're done,
Yeah.
and you don't know how you got done,
Yep.
or it's even more, I consider those more dangerous examples. You go drive back and from to work, and you're like, oops, what did I just do there? But I'm just wondering, with that, and I'm interested in getting your take on it. So, especially because well, again, I'm not sure if I have ADHD, but I don't think so because it doesn't work for me. um, there's been mention that if you do certain tasks with your offhand, that it helps to, and it does help in certain cases to do this. But from your perspective, have you ever tried something like that, or had somebody with ADHD or who's neurodivergent to try that as well?
I have not personally, but with my daughter's occupational therapist when she was still receiving services, yes, just to get her into that, like that zone, I guess you'd call it, the habit of doing it. So yeah, her occupational therapist did that with her, but I have not tried it personally. Just I've looked into it enough, I guess.
Well, one of the things that I've been doing is sort of a hack every day is if I'm not feeling it, I'll brush my hands. Oh, brush my hands. See, I can't even talk right today. I'll brush my teeth with my offhand, and then that it's supposed to activate the brain in different ways so that you're now force yourself to wake up and, do a good
Oh,
job.
to focus. Yeah.
Yeah, because, if you're doing it with your offhand, it feels weird, and, it's just,
Mhm.
you don't know if you're doing a good job or not. And the issue is that when you do that enough, then you get unconsciously competent doing that, so then you
Yep.
have to switch it up again, right?
It's, I think it is, and it's a very interesting concept. And I think for some people, yeah, it's going to work wonders, I'm sure. But then if you're doing it too often, it might become one of those bad habits, for lack of a better. And it's just like, all right, I'm going to accept it for what it is and just move on with the rest of my day.
Well, I mean, sometimes you do have to do that too, though.
Mhm.
I'm actually not really working with this person, but their mom, they're OCD, they're recently ADHD, and they're just go, go, go all day.
Mhm.
And, they complain they never have time for anything. We've tried to sit down and do lists. They don't like lists.
Mhm.
They don't like, when talking about delegation, they don't like giving people lists
Mhm.
because they figure, oh, well, we already know you live here. You know what needs to be done. I'm not sure how well that argument goes over, but, but what, what would you say? Because I mean, again, this is a case of when I watch her behavior, this is a case of, she'll be doing the dishes and then she'll notice the garbage can needs to be emptied. So she'll leave the dishes and she'll go put the garbage out. And then, and then she'll start vacuuming, but then she'll notice a scratch in the floor and then she'll be on the scratch in the floor, right?
I laugh only because it's very relatable. What's helped, I guess, with that is that, as silly as it sounds, timers. It's like, all right, I'm going to allow myself to get sidetracked by this thing, but only if I return to the original. And no, again, I only laugh just because I relate to this on a very deep level. Because I'll be sometimes, like cleaning up a certain part of the house and then I see something else like, oh, that needs to get done too. So then I go to the other shiny thing and I forget about what I was doing. But then, yes, either timers or if I have what I've done in the past too is carried around a pad of sticky notes and just written it down. It's like, go back to do this thing and put the sticky note in a place that I know I'm going to walk by. So in that sense, I'm a very visual person. But if it's something that I need to get done, like really need to get done, use audio, like auto, with a really loud or annoying buzzer because it's going to hurt my ears. I know it's going to be annoying. So I know I have to deal with it. Like, that's why I have to deal with it. So I can go back to my other thing that I was supposed to be doing in the first place. And then I just chalk it up as a win. It's like, oh, well, not only did I get this done, but I also got that done. Yay. So,
No, that is a win, and you just going back to it, it's one thing that I recently just thought of too is, when you're talking about music for time blindness, so timing certain tasks to certain
mhm.
songs that last a certain amount of time, and then just sticking right after, I don't know, Baby Shark or something that's gonna, be so totally
Yeah.
totally something you don't want to listen to that you're gonna be, oh, okay, no, it's time to change.
For people who've seen the movie Inception, it's how I explain it. It's like they have the music that kicks them back or, and all of that. So that's what I have to do is I have music, very specific playlists that have, you know, a certain length for certain tasks. And then again, if it's going to kick into something that I really can't stand, that I know I have to turn off, and that gets me back out my little hyper focusing. It works ridiculously well.
Yeah, I like that. I like that one. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, about your business and sort of how you look to empower, either neurodivergent mothers or mothers with your neurodivergent children?
Sure, sure. What I'm doing now is I work with people on a one-on-one basis, and it is purely asynchronous for both of our sakes, because that way I can be there for them on their time instead of having them, oh, we need to schedule all of these calls. We need to do all of this. I don't work that way. I can't. I know it works great for a lot of coaches, and I've tried that in the past. And what it ended up happening was that either I would miss an appointment very unintentionally because I had overlapping things, or my client would miss an appointment and then both of us would feel super guilty and we would stop showing up. So like, yeah, this isn't working. So one of my most recent business coaches, she has fully embraced the asynchronous support, and it works so great for her. So I was looking at how I could adapt that for myself. So that's what I do now, whether it's through email, if it's through Slack, if it's through Voxer, wherever we can meet on that is how we do support. So instead of one-on-one video calls, it's just completely asynchronous with very firm boundaries in place, because I need them to know it's like, I understand that you need support. However, I also need you to understand that I'm not tied to my computer. I'm not tied to my phone. I have a family. I need my own personal space, but I will respond to you. Which also helps for the rejection sensitive dysphoria pieces in my own brain. So, well, is this person intentionally ignoring me, or is she really ignoring me and she does not care? It's like, no, I care. I want to help, but I need you. So I think by also enforcing my boundaries with my clients, I'm modeling to them. It's like, it's okay to set your personal boundaries because you need the personal boundary. Your boundaries don't have to make sense to anybody else. They have to make sense to you. And so that's really one of the big things that we actually do work on is reinforcing boundaries. It's the productivity pieces. It's parenting without guilt, because when we think that I can't take time for myself, ridiculous. If you don't take time for yourself, then you're going to put yourself into burnout mode. And when you put yourself in burnout, you're not only doing so much harm to your own self, you're doing harm for your family, because you're not putting yourself in a position to really be there and to be present. And personally speaking, when I'm in burnout, my temper is so short because I only have enough energy to just sustain and maintain versus being actively present and being actively there. And you can't parent from a place of burnout. It's not sustainable. You're going to do long-term damage to your health, your physical health and your mental health, and potentially your relationships with your family, with your kids, with your partner, with whomever is in your life, because you're operating from this survival mode. And I'm not a people person in survival mode. I need to do the basic things to keep me alive. If you need something beyond that, I can't do it. And so it's doing that. It's working on things to prevent burnout mode altogether. It's being able to recognize, how to best support your child through a meltdown, and understanding that it's not about you. It's about whatever just set them off. And for a lot of the moms who are not neurodivergent, but have neurodivergent kids, we also start to see patterns and tendencies that may suggest neurodivergence, and then about supporting the mom with strategies, whether it's very similar to their child's or completely different. Because my daughter and I, my younger daughter and my older daughter, so daughters, we share a lot of the same sensory issues. We share a lot of the same executive functioning issues, but to different levels of how they impact and how they influence our day-to-day activities. But in that, like I've been able to show my younger daughter especially, so here's how I have to deal with my emotions. Here's how I have to handle things. And if I can explain that to her, or have explained it to her, it helps her understand and helps her deal with it. So it's that. It's a lot of modeling. When you understand why you're having a difficult time with something, you can look back on certain things with your children, or you can say to your children, it's like, okay, well, this is why you might be having a hard time, where you can give them the space to process and not push them. For an example, for both her, my younger daughter, and myself, emotional issues were a big, big thing. And I've learned to recognize that for me, it's my anger is the thing that really explodes first. But it's not necessarily because I'm angry. I might be frustrated. I might be sad. I might be annoyed. I might be any other number of things, but the anger is the one that comes out quick because it's the easiest for my body to express. Being able to put that into words, especially with my younger daughter, has made a world of difference, because then once I can give her the space to say, it's like, well, I feel angry. Okay. Do you feel anything else? And having those open conversations about the emotions and really letting her name what it is, because that's what she feels, instead of me trying to name it for her and tell her, it's like, well, this is what you're feeling. Having that space and having that capacity and having that, validation in there is huge. I think especially for kids, because we don't acknowledge a lot of the time what they are capable of explaining and feeling. And as adults, and maybe even especially as parents, we try to take ownership of it and place it for them, when in reality, we should be empowering our kids to take ownership of it because it is theirs. And so I don't know if that explains a lot of what I do, but it's situational. So it's the empowerment. It's a lot of self-empowerment. And it's learning to break the bad habits. It's learning to break the cycles. It's learning to look at the generational cycles and breaking those things, not just for your sake, but for your kids' sake. And just confronting and dealing with the things that maybe we don't want to deal with. So I'm also a trauma-informed coach, which was hugely important just for myself when I was looking for a therapist. I needed her to be trauma-informed because when I had gone through previous therapists, I'd walk away from my sessions feeling 100 times worse. And it's like, well, no wonder they're not giving me the space to really, process the things. So again, that was just hugely important. And for that reason, with my clients, I want to offer them, a variety of different things. If talk therapy is something that's worked for you in the past, we can incorporate aspects of it. I'm not a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist, but I can adapt things in that have worked for me and might work for you. If you are more of let's try EFT, emotional freedom technique. So tapping, let's try to. I'm kind of a skeptic, but I'll buy into, I think sometimes it works, sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it has its space. So I'm open to exploring different things and whatever. Ultimately, it's whatever works best for my client and what I can provide for them without over exhausting myself. And that's one of the biggest things too, is that the reason why I serve this particular audience instead of trying to be everything to everybody, which is what I had done in the past. And I burned myself out doing that. I had a lot of resentment towards my business. It's like, I can't do that anymore because I want to be in this business because I love doing what I do. And I do. And I want to support people who need the support, who need the help. And it ties back into something I said earlier with the disparity in the gap between resources and support for women on the spectrum or with ADHD, and then for girls. It's another rant that I have another day, but it's there. And if I can make a difference, then let me make that difference.
No, I understand. Thank you so much for sharing that. A couple of things in there. The emotional regulation thing is so important, and I completely do not understand why. I don't know what it's like in most other education systems, but I know that North America and in Central America anyway, you tend to start out with emotional regulation in kindergarten, like, oh, this is happy, this is sad, this is but then you go to the first grade, it sort of gets lost. And I noticed after COVID, now they're rushing to kind of cram it in twice a week sessions or something now with the kids.
Yeah.
Okay. So, one of the things I think that, I'd like to do is I'd like to, kind of educate children more, especially as they get into high school, because
absolutely,
you've got all that mess going on.
Mm-hmm.
The whole gender thing, guys and gals, doesn't discriminate like you said, but I mean, there's a lot going on with gals that we don't know because, and again, this has been covered on TED Talk. So, don't be throwing tomatoes at me. People go look it up.
Yep.
I don't remember the name of the TED Talk, but, she did outline that, and it's true because I went back and I looked at a lot of research that I was doing. It's true. We don't tend to focus too much on women just in general.
Mm-hmm.
So we do need to get better at that. Another question I had for you, because you did mention something about the EFT and the tapping, and I was curious to draw a correlation. I've actually been doing a little bit of research into like the different love languages.
Oh, yes.
And so you mentioned you're a very visual person.
Mm-hmm.
Then what would you consider is your love language then more acts of service, or is it more words of affirmation, or is it?
It's my primary love language is definitely acts of service, followed by words of affirmation. I've gotten a lot better, though, I think, with meaning the words of affirmation as I've gotten older. It was just learning that, okay, this is where the rejection sensitive dysphoria, I think, came in for me. So once I learned how to regulate that in myself, it's like, okay, I really don't need it quite as much. No, acts of service is definitely.
Yeah, I was just trying to see if there was a correlation. I hadn't seen any research to it, but my theory is that for the tapping, it's really going to be more effective in those individuals with that are rooted in that, like myself, physical touch is their main love language, and that's kind of where I'm stuck.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking you, because
it,
visual. No, okay.
yeah, so that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So I'd like to do a little more research on that for sure, and just see what could be the difference there. I do know it makes a big difference too, as you're talking about the guilt and things too, right? You mentioned a lot of these moms feel guilt, but I think a lot of moms are operating from that acts of service, or they've shifted into that acts of service. And, we just have to remember that those are all different. And especially as we're in neurodivergent households, my brother was diagnosed with Asperger's, and I know that, he goes out of his way and, he tries to do everything for everyone all the time, right? So I think that maybe by, in your experience, do you think there is a connection there? Is it worth investigating more?
I think it would be very interesting to see, even like from an informal standpoint, like how many people who are diagnosed or not diagnosed, but identify as, and to find out what their love language is. And, I think that would be really interesting to see, find out.
I'll have to stick it on a sticky note somewhere and remember to get that out. That'd be interesting. That would definitely be interesting. I think I'm gonna go do that. You've inspired me. I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna make a post about that. I'm gonna see how many people answer it. Probably crickets.
You know what? It's still worth putting out there. I think it's worth it. Yeah.
Absolutely. It has been an absolute delight of a conversation today, Kori. A lot of good insights. I really enjoyed it. We are coming up close to the time. Is there anything that you feel I should have asked that I didn't ask, or anything that we should have covered that we didn't cover today?
I think we've covered plenty, but just watch. It's going to be one of those moments, like as soon as we sign off, I'm going to think of, oh, well, we should have covered that. But no, I think we covered quite a bit. And ultimately, I think what matters, find systems that work for you instead of forcing yourself to work within the system. And just because society says it's supposed to work like this doesn't mean that it's going to work.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on to that too, and that, if you are working with a therapist or a coach, don't be afraid to stand in and say,
yeah,
this isn't working for me.
And don't be afraid to be your own best advocate, because you are your own best advocate. Just because they're the ones with medical degree or with the fancy letters after their name, you still know you best. So don't let somebody, I guess, for lack of a better term, gaslight you into thinking that nothing is wrong. We shouldn't be afraid to do that. Speak up.
Exactly. What a wonderful note to end on. Again, thank you so much for being on the show today, Kori. For all our listeners, don't worry. We're going to have some contact information in the bottom there, and then how you can reach out to Kori in the show notes. And once again, thank you for tuning in. Appreciate you being here, your feedback. And just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, just maybe go out and try to be that motivation or inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.